The folklore about Selkies is incredibly diverse. The now famous stories of Selkie brides are really only a small part of that lore, which was once popular around the coasts of Britain, Ireland, and the northwestern edges of Europe. I want to shed some light on traditional Selkie stories, as opposed to the modern versions, which are often presented as romances or children's stories. Recently, I've heard people say that Selkies are cute, or that they're mermaids. That's not how I understand them, and I'd say that it isn't how the people of Scotland, Ireland, the Faroes, and beyond traditionally understood them either. Selkies are a race which live as seals, but they can cast their seal skins off and come on land as humans. There's also a belief that they may live in underwater halls, not unlike castles, where their lives are similar to that of humans, or to fairies who live in otherworldly places. As I mentioned, Selkie bride stories are only one part of a vast tradition, but just in case you're not sure what a Selkie bride story is, here's the basic outline of a generic one. They usually start like this. A man sees naked people dancing on a beach or near the water. Being aware that they cannot return to the sea without their seal skins, he captures the skin of a certain female. Whether he admits the theft to her or not, the naked woman is compelled to follow him home, where he hides the skin from her. They live as man and wife, and usually have children, but the woman longs to return to the sea and her people. Eventually the skin is found, usually by one of the children, and the woman quickly returns to the sea. Sometimes she comes back for some limited contact with the children in her seal form. Usually the stories are short and simple. We don't really know where these stories started, but here are two different ideas about them. The first is an explanation from Irish folklore within the tales about the god Lugh and the evil Fomorian giant Balor. There are many versions of this story in Irish folklore, but the basic outline is this. A young man called Cian, or sometimes Cain, Keneally, or something similar, finds himself called on to go to an island off the coast of Donegal called Tory Island, which is the home of the giant Balor. Usually, Cian is there to recover a magical cow. The plot of the story is always arranged so that Cian is required to sneak into a tower where Balor's daughter is kept hostage by her father. Balor has good reason to keep her locked away from the world, because there's a prophecy that if she ever bears a son, that son will kill him. Cian always has a supernatural helper in this adventure, a druid or a fairy woman or Manannán mac Lir. The helper advises Cian to sleep with Balor's daughter and get her pregnant, but she always has female companions or servants, and Cian has to get them all pregnant, because that way they won't tell Balor that Cian has slept with his daughter. 9 months later, Cian and his helper sneak all of the babies out of the tower. There might be 3 babies, in some versions there are hundreds. However, something always happens which causes all the babies, except for Balor's grandson, to end up in the sea, where instead of drowning, they swim away as seals. So this is Irish folklore's answer to the origin of the Selkies. That in itself is interesting, since the story doesn't seem to be known at all in places like Shetland, which is practically Selkie Central. Before we talk about a different theory, let's have a look at the geography of all this. This map comes from a fascinating paper by Gregory Darwin, which is only concerned with the Selkie bride type stories, but even without accounting for the many other types of Selkie tale, you can see just how widespread these stories are. There's a concentration of them along the Atlantic coast of Scotland and Ireland, and up through the Faroes, Orkney, and Shetland, then a scattering in Norway, Sweden, and Iceland. Orkney journalist and folklore enthusiast Sigurd Tauri has an interesting theory about the origin of Selkie stories. In an essay called The Origin of the Selkie Folk, Tauri suggests that the Orcadian idea, at least, of seals shedding their skin and temporarily becoming human, may lie in local ideas about 2 groups of people from outside Orkney, the Sami and the Inuit. Bearing in mind that Orkney and Shetland were once part of Norway, not Scotland, it isn't surprising that the Sami people were known in the Northern Isles. Because they practiced a non-Christian religion with customs akin to shamanism, they were both respected and feared as healers and magicians. Over time, as Orkney became more closely aligned with Scotland, people might have been less familiar with the Sami, who they called Finnar, or Finn folk, but the legends and folk memories remained. Somehow, over time, Towery argues, the word Finn came to be misunderstood, and in folklore, the Finn folk became a mythical aquatic race. Towery goes on to tell how in the 17th century there are records of sightings of so-called Finn men in Orkney and Shetland. These were unfamiliar-looking men in skin kayaks. The idea of Inuits so far to the southeast might seem unlikely until you take into account several centuries of very cold weather in the northern hemisphere, known as the Little Ice Age. This seems to have been at its coldest between about 1645 and 1715, near the time when sightings of the so-called Finn men were recorded. It's quite possible that in some winters the sea ice came far enough south that Inuit people might have traveled a long way from their usual homelands. Both their kayaks and their clothing would have periodically become waterlogged, forcing them to haul out on rocks or beaches to dry. From a distance, to people unfamiliar with such things, they might have seemed like a strange seal race, transforming themselves into humans on dry land. Whether this is the entire origin of the stories of Selkies, or just a part of it, is harder to say. But I love stories, and there's so much more to Selkie stories than Selkie brides. So coming up, I'll try to give you a flavor of some of these stories and suggest sources where you can read them or hear them told. If you like my videos, please share them, comment, or give them a thumbs up. There's more free content on my Patreon page and on my website. If you're feeling spontaneous, you could buy me a cuppa on Ko-fi right now. All the links are below this video. In one type of story, sometimes called the seal killer, a seal escapes from a hunter with the man's knife sticking between his ribs. Later, the hunter is approached by a mysterious man and taken to the underwater palace of the Selkie folk and given a chance to heal the wounded Selkie. There's a great version of this by Orcadian storyteller Tom Muir on the Scottish Storytelling Centre's channel. In his 1822 book, A Description of the Shetland Islands, Samuel Hibbert tells a story of a type well known in Shetland, where a party of men kill and skin a group of seals. A storm rises, and one of the men becomes separated from the hunting party, only to be approached by a female Selkie, who persuades him to fetch back her son's skin in return for being rescued. Sometimes a Selkie or its relatives takes revenge on a hunter for taking the life of a seal, especially a young one. The story of the sealskin waistcoat in David Thompson's book, The People of the Sea, is a great example of this. And if you're interested in Selkie stories and the people who told them, I really recommend this book. It's been reprinted many times since I bought my old copy in the 1980s, so you won't have any trouble finding one. Women also took Selkie lovers. Male Selkie lovers generally pair with lonely human women who may attract them by magical means, such as crying a single tear into the sea. But unlike Selkie brides, male Selkies retain their autonomy and often return to claim their offspring, sometimes leaving the woman with gold or other treasure. The famous folk ballad The Great Selkie tells this kind of story. In other stories, a man is about to kill a seal, but he changes his mind because of the look in its eyes or its pitiful behavior. Later, that seal rescues him when he is about to drown. The tale of the Selkie wha did not forget, which you can find in the Orkney website, is one of these. Some people believe that Selkies were fallen angels, or souls of the drowned, or mortals trapped in seal form. Others believed that if a woman was on a boat that capsized, she would be taken by male Selkies. Mothers used to paint a cross on their daughter's breast for protection against this if she was going on a sea journey. Sometimes families were believed to be descended from Selkies in some communities, possibly because they had a condition which caused deformities on the hands and feet, such as webbing or horny growth. Members of such families were often believed to have magical powers or to be under taboos against hunting seals. Such a tale was told about a family descended from an Orcadian woman called Ursula, which is published in the book Orkney Folklore. There's also a fine version of Tom Muir telling the story on SoundCloud. So I hope this video has helped you to get a better understanding of traditional Selkie folklore. Thanks for watching.